Cherubs, this painting is called The Gallant Conversation, but that's misleading. It doesn't really have a name, like the artist didn't give it a title. That's just what art historians tend to call it today. And about 100 years ago, it was called something completely different. 100 years ago, they called it The Paternal Admonition. People as clever as the polymath Goethe looked at this painting and thought that it illustrated a father admonishing his daughter for some misdeed, while the mother sipped wine and looked at the floor awkwardly. And that makes sense, I guess. It does look like he's scolding her, and her body language looks contrite. But nobody really believes that today. The guy in the painting looks too young to be a father. He's clearly a soldier. And if we look at other paintings from the time period, which is like what we're going to do, that's what this video is about, we'd recognize a popular subject in paintings. This is a man negotiating some sort of relationship with a woman. Most people these days think that he's negotiating a price for time with a sex worker. Now, it's possible that he's just negotiating a betrothal, that this is just a courtship that precedes a marriage. There are some people who hold that position, but I personally find the brothel interpretation more convincing. Take this dog in the background. If this were a domestic scene within the home of somebody negotiating the terms of marriage, I'd imagine a cute little spaniel curled up on a rug. Painters of the Dutch Golden Age knew how to do that. But this dog in the background, it doesn't look like a house dog. This dog looks more like a cur, like a street dog, something that might be found outside of a brothel. That said, Cuse house dogs can also appear in brothel scenes, like this one. Either way though, this is a popular subject for Dutch Golden Age painting, that is to say, paintings from the early mid-17th century. It's a scene of a soldier, and it's almost always a soldier, talking to a woman in an interior domestic-looking space. There was a market for these types of paintings. People painted them, and those paintings found buyers. So in this video, I want to investigate the question of what's up with that. Why would images of soldiers talking to women, often in a brothel that could be mistaken for a household, be popular at this time? I mean, the population of people buying art in this time were wealthy merchants, not soldiers. These paintings do not feature the men who would be buying them and presumably hanging them on their walls. So these paintings and this trend offer us an opportunity to investigate something that does not make intuitive sense and gain a better understanding of history and the role that art plays in different kinds of communities. So that's what we're going to do today. And if it sounds like your kind of thing, please consider subscribing for more videos like it. That said, let's dig into these Dutch Golden Age paintings of soldiers talking to women. So before we can fully understand what's going on in a painting like the playfully named Gallant Conversation, or the Gallant Officer, or this brothel scene, or this brothel scene, or this probably actual domestic scene by Vermeer that features a soldier speaking with a laughing girl, we're going to need some bit of historical background. We can start with a simple question like, what's up with these soldiers? And a simple answer to that simple question is that between 1568 and 1648, the Dutch were in a very long fight for their independence from the Habsburg King of Spain. The Spanish wanted them to be subjects of the Spanish crown and to be Catholic, and they wanted neither of these things, so they fought for their independence. It took 80 years. This struggle ended in 1648. The Spanish signed the Peace of Westphalia, which granted autonomy to the northern provinces of the Netherlands, and so the war was over. The soldiers weren't fighting anymore. Consequently, they could be seen in domestic spaces rather than the battlefield. That's the simple answer. But this simple answer obscures the complex politics and significations of soldiers at this time. Their presence is more complicated than that simple answer. That answer explains why soldiers might appear in a domestic setting, but it doesn't explain what kind of associations the soldiers carry with them when they enter a composition like this. And to be honest, I'm not sure that we could ever figure that out, but it's fun to try. So first, we have to note that at this time, the Dutch were making truly miraculous amounts of money through the Dutch East India Company. The Dutch East India Company functioned like its own nation. Like, the company could, and did, declare war on anybody who broke contract with them, or refused to sign a contract with them. It was like a nation operating within a nation, and that caused some tension. The structure of the Dutch East India Company allowed for a lot of people to invest invest money in merchant enterprises with limited risk. It helped create a capitalist class of merchants that did not easily fit into the old structures of monarchy and nobility with inherited wealth. So when this business that functioned like a nation needed an army to protect their interest against the Catholic Spanish king, they bought one. They hired soldiers to fight against the Spanish rule and to protect their ships and support their imperialist projects abroad. So the soldiers had contracts, and these contracts were more numerous in times of war. As a result, every time the Dutch and Spanish reached any sort of peace agreement during that 80 Years' War, soldiers found themselves out of work and hanging out in cities. And yes, the 80 Years' War wasn't just 80 years of continuous war. There were moments of peace, like the 12-year truce between 1609 and 1621, for example. So in those moments of peace, the guy in charge of foreign affairs and national defense, a position called the stadtholder, along with the support of the soldiers, would find themselves a lot less influential and with a lot less status than they did during times of war. So the stadtholder, with support from the soldiers, would get involved in domestic affairs and try to extend his influence into local politics and, theological disputes. The stadtholder would reliably try to consolidate power and become something similar to a monarch in these times. The 12-year truce, for example, ended when the stadtholder executed the man responsible for the truce. The war started up again, and the stadtholder and the soldiers had their influence back in a system that resembles a monarchy. And the merchant class, like all those guys making tons of money through investments in the Dutch East India Company, a class known as the Burghers, they definitely didn't want anything that looks like a monarchy. They were trying to build a new kind of government, better suited for their capitalist exploits. They wanted their nation to run more like a company with a board of directors. So the stadtholder and the soldiers could be seen on one side of the political spectrum, and the local leaders who composed the Republican government, the States General, and the burghers could be seen on the other side. Soldiers represented the interests of the stadtholder, merchants represented the interests of the Republic. And this tension between these two factions always resurfaces during times of peace. So in 1648, when the Peace of Westphalia ends the war, the stadtholder, a man named William II at the time, picked a fight with the merchant burghers. He tried to consolidate power in his position, and he probably would have won, but he died of the smallpox in 1650. And with that bit of luck, the Dutch Republic was at peace and free from both foreign and domestic threats to their freedom. The term for this period in Dutch history is the true freedom. They had separated from the Catholic Church, from the Spanish monarchy, from traditional forms of nobility. They had formed a new economic system, and all their neighbors recognized their independence and their right to run their own nation with merchants in charge rather than a hereditary nobility. And with this new true freedom came new trends in painting. In the past, the subjects of painting would be religious, or portraits of nobles with their family, or history paintings of soldiers winning battles. And this makes sense. The Catholic Church and the nobility were the ones paying for the art, so they commissioned paintings based on their values. But with the rise of a merchant class, and particularly after 1650, those art patrons were gone, and none of those traditional subjects would have fit the tastes of the burghers. I'm sure that there's a joke to be made about the tastes of the burghers, but I'm not the one to make it. So without the church or nobles commissioning paintings, we see the rise of what art historians call the genre painting. Scenes of everyday domestic life in the Netherlands. People reading letters, or taking music lessons, or maids pouring milk, or people negotiating the cost of a brothel visit. The burghers are the new art patrons, and the important scenes for them to memorialize are scenes from everyday domestic life in the Republic. They often feature interior scenes with soldiers, young women, maps, lots of maps. So now you might be wondering, but if the burghers are the new art patrons, and the burghers and the soldiers seem to have competing political interests, why are there so many soldiers in these paintings? Like when the Catholic Church commissioned art, they commissioned art that makes the Catholic Church look cool. But how can we explain a painting like The Eavesdropper? In this painting, you have the head of a household, a burgher, toasting with his friends upstairs, while his daughter flirts with a soldier downstairs, and his wife instructs us to keep it a secret. This does not make the merchant look cool. And yeah, I'm right there with you. That question is why I'm making this video right now. It doesn't make any intuitive sense. It's moments of confusion like this that spark curiosity in me. I mean, what's up with these paintings of soldiers? So here's a painting that makes sense to me. It has a burgher sitting front and center. In fact, the entire perspective of this painting is warped just to allow this guy to man-spread at the center of the composition and show off his house with pretty flowers in the window. Without the Catholic Church taking on the charitable responsibilities of the community, this guy has to decide whether or not to extend charity to this woman. This is the type of painting I might expect from this time period. It's about civic responsibility of the merchant class within a new form of government. He represents a new politically engaged type of individual who has a moral responsibility to his community, and he looks cool and powerful doing it. This, I understand. But the eavesdropper? A strong argument could be made that the presence of a soldier in a painting represents monarchy, or at least the threat of monarchy coming back into the country. A soldier would support the stadtholder in a fight for power against the burghers. And at a more basic level, soldiers are the subjects of history paintings, and history paintings glorify the old forms of government and status. This soldier is a threat, and paintings like this make it seem like that threat is inside the house. So I've read a few theories about why the burghers might be paying for paintings like this, and I want to run them by you all, and after that, let's just look at a specific Vermeer painting together with all that we've learned. The first theory is that perhaps these paintings are cautionary tales. Perhaps they're ways of processing a fear that the burghers have. They're afraid of the soldiers and everything that the soldiers stand for. And so, by putting these soldiers in these paintings and then hanging them on one's wall in the house, it'll serve as a constant reminder of the threat, which is the best way to make sure that that threat never happens. It keeps the threat centered in the household and ensures the merchant who buys this painting will constantly be alert to that threat. So put those soldiers in brothels, picture them drinking and gambling, and also picture them talking to your daughter. That way, you'll stay vigilant. Or another theory, maybe these paintings are laughing at the threats of the past. Like, they ultimately did survive the 12-year truce, and then they survived the crisis of 1650. When these images were put on canvas, they didn't know that the stadtholder from the House of Orange would return in 1672 to end the true freedom. When these were painted, they had successfully avoided a series of threats to their autonomy, and now they get to put that threat on the wall of their house. They won, and now they get to laugh at their old fears. They're playful, funny, ironic paintings, a series of inside jokes that powerful burghers can laugh at now that they actually have the true freedom. And I mean, yeah, these paintings are kind of funny sometimes. Or maybe, and this would really only be true of the scenes that take place properly inside the house and not inside a brothel, maybe these scenes are more optimistic than ironic. Perhaps they're showing Dutch virtue as represented by the woman and the Dutch fortitude and strength represented by the soldier. Maybe it's a coming together of the peaceful domestic life and the soldiers who made it possible. Maybe these images ignore the negative associations of the soldiers or the monarchical associations of the soldiers. Or maybe different paintings are playing different games and all these theories are true to some degree. Who knows? So if that's the case, and we need to look at them individually, let's do that, and take a close look at a single painting with these critical lenses in mind. Let's take perhaps the most well-known image of a soldier talking to a woman painted during the True Freedom. Vermeer's Officer and Laughing Girl. The Officer and Laughing Girl by Vermeer has a lot going on. The first thing we might notice is that the soldier has a magnificent hat. This is the type of hat that would be extremely fashionable in 1655. It's probably made from beaver pelt. That would have cost quite a bit, and that material, the beaver pelt, also reminds us that Dutch wealth is the product of global exploits. The beaver pelt used to make this probably would have come from North America. Owning luxury goods from abroad nearly always signals social prestige, but in the Netherlands, in the 1650s, this is particularly true. Dutch success depended on international commerce, so knowledge of the world as signaled by foreign imports carried loads of social capital. By wearing this hat, the soldier is playing a status game. He's showing off the fact that he knows about the world and has fashionable international tastes. In the past, this soldier may have assumed he has a right to this lady because he won some battle. The old woman as the spoil of war trope. But that hat tells us that this soldier is trying to prove he's worthy of this lady's attention in ways that don't involve violence. He doesn't assume that he has a right to her. I mean, he probably still does. This painting doesn't exist outside of patriarchy or something, but his courtship is taking a different form. He's trying to impress her. He has his fancy outfit and he's making her laugh. So there's been a transformation in the power relationship here. The wars are over, so he cannot win a woman with victory. Instead, he wears his best outfit and flirts with her. What gave him prestige before no longer does, so he has to find that prestige through other significations, like a big hat. This might be a stretch here, but perhaps that's why the map above their heads is reversed. You'll notice that the land is blue and that brownish color has ships on it. The colors on the map are reversed just as the gender roles have been reversed. In times of war, the soldier has authority and respect. In times of peace, domestic virtue, as represented by the lady, has authority and respect. The soldier, to some degree, has to play her game rather than her needing to submit to his game. He has to impress her rather than win her. And while we're talking about the maps, these maps appear in paintings from this time period all the time. Judging by these paintings and the historical record, they seem to be very popular to hang on the wall, and this makes sense. In the 17th century, no one in Europe was making or buying more maps than the Dutch. As I said, knowledge of the world is social capital, given the cultural values of this community, so maps are a clear and obvious expression of worldliness. And in the northern provinces of the Netherlands in the 17th century, they're also a symbol of national pride. The map itself mixes international with the residential, just as this courtship between a worldly soldier and a young woman in the house does. So maybe a painting like this is actually about the gravitational pull of Republican domestic Dutch values. Maybe this particular painting is about the subordination of the soldier to the respectability of the household. The new Dutch system of government, economics, and religion pull the soldier with all his associations of monarchy and debauchery toward a virtuous life. In another Vermeer painting, a woman stands by a window reading a letter. No soldiers appear in this image, but the map in the background hints that the letter is from somebody traveling on one of those merchant ships. Perhaps in a time of peace, the soldier missing from this painting and represented by the letter has joined a ship heading to the Pacific Ocean. The missing soldier remains tethered to domestic life through the letter and a meaningful relationship back home. In a painting like this, we see the intimacy that might coerce the soldier away from mischief and toward civic virtue. Lots of these Dutch genre paintings feel like these two Vermeer paintings. Like we're looking onto a private scene. Like we've just pulled back the curtain leading to the next room and we're watching some slice of life. And I think that's a big reason why they're so engaging. And what I personally love about that is that it's an opportunity to learn about the hopes and fears of people who lived so long ago and the way that they invested objects with meaning. These scenes grab our attention with the promise of a secret or a story that we need to piece together, and then that story opens up for us as we try to understand it through an historical investigation. Shifting religious, political, and economic identities find their form in these paintings, and they allow us, 350 years later, to witness these transformations as we grapple with our own shifting identities in an increasingly interconnected world. And that's all I've got for today. Thank you for watching, and please consider subscribing or checking out my Patreon. There's a link in the description below. See you next month.